Ryan Rishaug joins us from the heat of Dallas. Ryan, I'm not even going to begin to go down the route of I told you so. I had to mention the heat in Dallas because you're just dripping right now, and I had to make mention of that. Listen.
It's okay, Gino.
We talked about
I think you should bask in it. I think you should bask in it. You said it yesterday. You were one of the believers. You were not buying this Dallas in their depth and going to give the Oilers all this trouble. And, Gino, I think you're not one to pat yourself on the back, so I will pat you on the back. You had the right idea. The depth wasn't as overwhelming as some people thought it would be. They were right in that. They played a heck of a game, so credit to you, Gino. You nailed that one yesterday. This kills me to do, but you've earned it.
Hey, listen, in fairness to Skinner, he hung in there. We'll talk about him in a few minutes because if he doesn't do what he does, Connor McDavid doesn't get a chance to do what he does. All right. We need to point out and make reference to the fact that you're standing outside of your hotel. You're not at the rink. And matter of fact, the Oilers were not at the rink at all. Is this load management right now in the NHL, or what's going on? Why?
Yeah, for sure. All I know is it's 35 degrees out here, Gino. And I'll probably be throwing this suit away when this hit is done. It is so hot. It is so humid. I'm so happy to be standing in this flower garden fountain type thing instead of inside a nice cool rink. But yes, you're right. You're bang on. This is about rest management, load management. But the Oilers did a really good job in the last series of giving guys the space they needed. And I think the head coach and his staff communicate a lot with the players about what they need. It's very unusual for players to go 2 days between games. Like they take the next day off and then don't take morning skate. And they were doing that during the Vancouver series as the series moved on because they needed it. And so complete day away from the rink for the Oilers today. I think this was the plan, whether the game had gone to overtime or not last night. It's about managing their energy levels. And I think that they've learned, and I think they're getting better at it. And I think that it's showing in game. The team is giving itself its best chance at having as much energy as possible by doing things like they're doing here today.
Not only the load management, Ryan, between games, but also during the games for guys like Connor McDavid. Listen, we were talking about nights where Connor McDavid had almost 30 minutes of ice time in a game that ended in regulation. We're starting to see that scale back. As a matter of fact, okay, there were a couple of penalties that kept Connor McDavid off the ice in the first period, but he didn't even have 5 minutes of ice time in the first period of Game 1 of the Western Conference Final. Is this an overall managing McDavid more so even than Draisaitl in the series itself?
I don't know if it's purposeful in terms of managing McDavid's minutes, Gino, as much as it is understanding that if this team is going to get where it wants to go, it's going to have a whole bunch of people pulling on the rope. It can't be as top-heavy as they get at times. And I think Chris Knobloch understands that. So I believe he starts every game with the intention of rolling 4 lines. I think he knows that's a best-case scenario. And naturally, McDavid's minutes are going to come down when that happens. So in a game like last night, he comes out rolling 4 lines, and they're all playing well. They're matching up well against Dallas at even strength. They're holding their own. He had a whole pile of usable players throughout that game. And when that's the case, he doesn't have to pile the ridiculous minutes onto 97 and 29 and such. So I think it's a product of a game plan they want to have work. On a lot of nights it doesn't. On a lot of nights they just can't because some guys aren't able to handle it. But in a game like last night, everybody showed up. Everybody was ready. Everybody was pulling on the rope, and that allowed them to back off of McDavid.
Everybody's going to pick their certain moments, the certain aspects of a game where they go, that was a difference maker in the game. Obviously, Connor McDavid scores a double overtime. That's a difference maker. But the thing that stood out to me was the Oilers' penalty kill. Yes, their power play's been great. They only had one chance. They went 0 for 1. But they went 5 for 5 on the PK, including shutting down that double minor in overtime that could have been completely disastrous for the Oil. Is this penalty kill taking things to a completely other level that even a team as offensively gifted as the Dallas Stars can't figure it out?
Yeah, I think you're bang on, Gino. I don't know how often you would be able to say, what is a team's most dangerous weapon? And have the answer be their penalty kill. But that's kind of what's happening now for the Oilers. They were perfect in the first round against LA. They were perfect in the last 3 games against Vancouver. They were perfect in last night's game 1 of the conference final, including the double minor you talked about. So when you think about a team's weapons, you tend to more think about their high-end guys and their scorers and that sort of thing. But when you are nullifying the other team's biggest advantage in a game, which is to have one more player on the ice than you do, and you're making it like it's no different, that's a huge weapon. It's been massive for this team. And I'll tell you what, Gino, you don't hear the name Mark Stewart a ton, right? Former defenseman in the NHL. When Chris Knobloch took the job here in Edmonton, he couldn't take on everything. The penalty kill he handed to Mark Stewart and said, this is yours. And since that time, the numbers have been off the charts. So not a name we hear often, but definitely a guy that deserves a tremendous amount of credit.
I want to talk about Pete DeBoer. He's a guy who I've known since he was coaching the Kitchener Rangers in the Ontario Hockey League about 1 million years ago. The look on his face coming off the ice after yet another Game 1 loss in a playoff series, I don't understand it, Ryan. They don't seem to get frazzled by the fact that they are able to come back, and Pete DeBoer is a guy who makes major adjustments. Is there any way to explain why they've been so abysmal in the opening game of a series, and what do you anticipate in terms of them reacting? This is the Dallas Stars, the number 1 seed in the Western Conference. They're not going to go down easily.
I think in some ways, you know, it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy a little bit in some ways. I mean, we dealt with this with the Oilers. They couldn't win a Game 1 either there for a pretty long stretch. So I don't know if it gets into their heads. I don't know if they were nervous. I don't know if it was too much time off. The Oilers showed up and were really ready to play in that game. And I thought they did a really good job early on. And I don't really know what the answer is. It's one of those head scratchers because it doesn't really make a ton of sense. You're at home. You've got more rest. You know what it takes. You've been here recently. It doesn't add up. So in terms of adjustments and such, I think they're glad Game 1's over. And they're glad they don't have to play another Game 1 tomorrow. It'll be Game 2. So that's good for them. But I guess Rupi Hintz potentially comes back. And I don't know if it'll be in Game 2 or Game 3. That'll be a big adjustment for them. That's a huge guy that they'll add back into their lineup. It's a head scratcher, and sometimes these things just don't make a lot of sense.
Skinner, given the way he came out of the block this year, speaking of not making a lot of sense, and given what he's been able to do, we've seen him roller coaster. We've seen him sit and watch a couple of games last round. Then we saw him bounce back in 6 and 7, and now in 1 in the Western Conference Final. It's a Jekyll and a Hyde thing from Stu Skinner. Is there something psychologically in between his ears that makes him elevate at times, or is it just the style of play of the guys in front of him who are giving him opportunity on some nights more so than others? Because he was amazing.
Yeah, I think Stuart Skinner is responsible for his own play. There's a lot that goes on around him, and you know, sure, there are other things that impact the way a goalie's night goes, but I think he'd be the first one to take full responsibility for his play. And so it's a work in progress with Stu Skinner deep into the playoffs here, right? He's going through some of this stuff for the first time. He had a bump in the first round and he bounced back. He had a bad bump in the second round. He got a chance to bounce back, and he did. Then last night he gets the start. You know, this is the deepest that he's been, a great opportunity, and he was excellent, you know. And that's the thing with Stu Skinner. Like, this isn't, everybody thinks that Stu Skinner just needs to be, just be solid, and the Oilers, you know, can get to where they want. I completely disagree with that. When you're this deep in the playoffs, you need to have excellent goaltending. And I think Skinner knows that too, and I think that's the bar that he sets. And he was excellent last night. He out-dueled Jake Ottinger when the narrative coming in was that Dallas had the advantage in net. So I think that was a massive bump in confidence for Stuart Skinner. I think that was a big step forward. He's had some setbacks, but he seems to have the fortitude to absorb those and come back. And as long as he keeps doing that, I mean, I can understand why people maybe would give Dallas the advantage here. But you can't discount what he did last game, and he needs to get full credit for that. With that said, Gino, the Oilers are doing a good job. They're not giving up a ton of really, really great opportunities against either.
You know who's doing a great job is Leon Draisaitl. One at a time. When we talk again, we'll talk about Draisaitl because the guy's amazing. His 40th playoff goal. What he's doing now in this 13-game streak is insane.
Ridiculous.
We'll see if he can extend that. Yeah, and if he goes to 14, there'll only be one guy in NHL history with a longer streak, a point-scoring streak to start the playoffs. That's insane. He's going to have the opportunity to do that on Saturday night in Dallas, and that's where Ryan Rishaug is. They're getting set for Game 2 of the Western Conference Final. Get out of the heat, brother. Get into the AC.
I'm going to go jump in this fountain right now. Just going to go dive right in.
Quick, dip to black. I don't want to see it.